commodity, even in their intrinsically interesting field, that they have to be willing to pay the price. But it's gladdening, I think, that they care more about their jobs than they do about money. It's an attitude that makes anyone who possesses it easy to exploit. And so it's an attitude that's hard to sustain in a world full of understandable, easily justifiable, and hardly softening greed. What I think I'm talking about is the human desire for interesting work set against the human drive for inventing new tools and techniques, for finding new ways of doing things that increase profit and can, incidentally, reduce opportunities for craft. The two desires often seem to spring from the same basic impulses. Craft tends to destroy craft, or at least to rearrange the terms under which craft can be practiced. I mean by craft, interesting work that you want to be right. I found, perhaps because I wanted to, something vaguely heroic, albeit selfish, in the willingness of a bunch of carpenters and a bunch of engineers to make economic and other sorts of sacrifices for the sake of being interested in their jobs. The computer engineers talked about pinball, which I told you I would come back to, when they talked about motivation. Pinball was defined as follows. You win one game, you get to play the next. You win with this machine, you get to build the next interesting big machine. The carpenters seemed to see their futures similarly. Half finished with one big new house, they'd sit around at lunch discussing with relish the next job and the ways in which they'd do it better. The wish to play pinball, as the computer engineers defined it, is a hope to get the reward Sisyphus got. You know, the guy who had to roll the stone endlessly to the top of the hill and then have it come down before he got there. To some, obviously, Sisyphus's burden is a vision of hell, but the great French writer Albert Camus saw it differently. And I think you'd have to say of my carpenters and my computer engineers, I don't mean my, I mean ones I watched, what Camus said of Sisyphus, which is, one must imagine him happy. That's all I have to say to you tonight, but I can answer questions if you have some. Are there any questions? Yes?
See, the increase in use of personal computers such as data processors creates more stuff, but not necessarily better stuff. What do you think the effect is of that? What does that mean?
I don't know, decimation of forests. I think, but that's a good question. I'm not sure it really means anything. Gosh, more confusion though, more paper pushing. There was an interesting study that I can't cite to you now. I mean, I can't cite it the way a good scholar would, having to do with the commercial applications of computers at a certain time, not too long ago, maybe different now, but this study suggested that about 40% of all commercial applications of computers were uneconomical, in the sense that the job that they were bought to perform ended up costing more than it had before after the computer was installed. But that not all the people who gotten them were unhappy because they found other things for them to do, and besides they felt kind of, you know, pretty cool to have a computer there, you know. What that suggests to me is that you get, I mean, computers are always sold by PR men as, I mean, one PR man actually said to me once, we're not in competition with other computer companies, we're in competition with labor. That's a whole problem unto itself that I don't want to get into, unless you want me to. But it seems obvious to me that there's a whole legion of paper pushing, I mean a whole lot of paper pushing now that is being made necessary by not just computers, but probably more important, you know, Xerox machines, copying machines. But I have no idea what it all means. You know, I really don't like technological forecasting. Yes?
What about the attitudes of the older engineers that worked at Dow General? How about their experience of undertaking the opportunity? You know, were they motivated to build a new machine? Were they more interested in managing?
Yeah. I think the older, I had a whole theory, you know, it's always dangerous to generalize from a small group of people, but I don't mind doing it. It seemed to me that there was something intrinsic in that trade that made it very hard after about the age of 30, or maybe even a little younger, to want to go on doing what you've been doing before. The pace of projects was swift. You know, the work could be grueling, the hours were long. The kids coming out of school seemed to know so much more about all the latest stuff in chips, you know. And so and also I think in the training of engineers, at least the ones I knew, the prospect of being a manager, I mean, that was what you're supposed to be. That was one of the prescribed steps in your path through life. So I think there was almost an inborn desire to be a manager. The fellow Carl Alsing, who was so wonderfully honest with me, put it this way, said, I used to scream and holler about NAND gates and bits and bytes, but I'm too old to feel that way about computers now. And then he wanted to say, West is what interests me. What's he doing? But yeah, you know, I think that's. On the other hand, and I don't know what the success they've had. Places like Bell Labs have tried to create a separate sort of hierarchical structures for technologists so that they can advance up the ladder and still remain engineers. I have no idea how well that works. Does that answer you? Sort of? Yes?
How long are personal computers built to last?
Gee, I don't know. We'll see. Maybe as long as hula hoops. I don't know. I don't know too much about them. I really bailed out. After I wrote that book, you know, it was just sort of coincidence. The big wave of public fascination hit, and I just kept getting letters and phone calls saying, write this, write that about computers, and hey, listen, I'm watching a story unfold that's just like the one you told. Come and write about us. And I wanted to get away from it. I really did. So I don't know much about personal computers. I just know what I hear on TV. And, you know, I get tired of it. How long do you think they're built to last? I suppose, you know, I mean, chips will function. I mean, those machines probably will function until the chips get dusty, which would be a long time. Dusty, that was a joke that someone told me. Yes?
Did you see a real interest in both your builders and the house builders and the computer builders and just in gadgetry? And just the sameness of...
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Gadgetry wouldn't be quite the right word. I think that most of these people I'm writing about, first of all, are men almost exclusively. A couple of exceptions. But as little boys, they like to tinker with things. That seems to be true also of carpenters. But the computer engineers whom I knew, at least the hardware side of that team, didn't really like to play with computers. That seemed to them really stupid. Their game was much more interesting to them. Microcoders, who were halfway between hardware people and programmers, did like to. And I mean, to that extent, you know, the gadgetry was interesting. But they were so engaged. I mean, the tools is what interested them. And tools really interest carpenters. In some of the same ways. Although I think carpenters have a closer relation to them. I mean, those things have been around a lot longer, and they can buy one when they're a young fellow starting out, something really fine, and keep it for the rest of their career. And there's a whole long tradition of carpenters passing down their tools. And I don't think computer engineers are going to be passing down logic analyzers. For one thing, they don't own them. It costs a lot. Yes?
Are you planning on doing a project of this nature, saying that some other thing, not particularly a computer or building a house or some other?
Well, I'm working on this house thing right now.
The house thing?
Yeah, it's a very strange book. Get a lot of blank looks when I tell people what I'm doing. But I got a lot of blank looks when I was doing the computer one. That doesn't necessarily mean that what I'm doing now is a good idea, but I'm in the middle of that. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I'm going to go fishing. Yes?
From the perspective of journalism, you analyze computers. What do you think would happen if somebody were to do the opposite kind of thing?
Psychopathia sexualis. No, that's the wrong one. I don't know. I mean, analyze journalists. People have done that, you know. That I don't know. There have been some funny things. You ever read there's a book called The Boys on the Bus, which was a book about the journalists covering one of the presidential campaigns. That was pretty lively, interesting. Journalists drink a lot. A lot of them do. I don't know what else to say. You know. That didn't answer your question, but I'm not sure I understood it. Okay, sorry. Anything else that I can confuse you about? Yes.
Backing up just a little bit, when you're talking about people over 30 not being paid, but you do think that's based pretty much on the number of years they've been at it rather than the particular age? As someone who's already over 30 and just getting ready to start?
Oh, I don't think it has anything to do with the age. It has something to do with salaries. I mean, you know, computer engineers aren't pulling their weight unless there's some special reason to get thrown out on the street. And if you can hire someone out of school who looks like be a better computer engineer than the one you've got, have to pay twice as much. That's a fairly easy choice for a lot of people in America to make, I think. Yeah, thank you.